But I think there's going to be plenty of people who are very enthusiastic about something that's minimal, is web standards, no extra TypeScript build step, just works out of the box and gets you fast, static, and server-generated HTML.
And the thing I love about it most is it's super webby. It's got web components. The source code is extremely readable. So like, I was like, oh, I wonder how you're doing this. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And it's not difficult to read as a normal human, which is great.
Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. Today we have on Mauro Bieg. He's creating the framework Mastro.js. It's sort of like Astro, but Mastro. And so Mauro, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Do you want to just introduce yourself for people who might not know who you are and what you're working on?
Sure. Usually I call myself a full stack developer still these days. I started messing around with HTML and CSS when I was in high school. Back with it was like, no tables, use semantic HTML. So I'm not going to say my age, but you can roughly guess it by that.
That's my age too.
Yeah. I think we have similar stories.
There are lots of us still around, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
We're just getting older a lot faster now.
Yeah, and after that, I actually studied computer science at ETH Zurich here in Switzerland. So I think I can call myself an engineer, not serious. I also dabbled around a little bit with Haskell at that time, but yeah, later gravitated more to more hands-on and practical things again, although I still think Haskell is a beautiful language. And then when I started working, I joined various startups as an engineer and everything person and later CTO. And at one point, I also was a technical team lead for the front-end team at the big Swiss newspaper. And that was kind of interesting as well. But now I'm back as an engineer at a startup again. That's kind of what I do during the daytime, and at the nighttime when the kids are asleep.
Nice.
I hack a little bit on Mastro.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that sounds pretty familiar to us with kids, just, having to do stuff at night. But tell us about this project you have here. So this is Mastro.js or TS.
Yeah, I haven't quite settled whether the JS TS thing is part of the name or not.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this earlier, me and Eric, but it's pretty typical even for pure TypeScript projects to do like a .js. And that's just sort of a convention,
Yeah.
Even though some pedants will be like, but it's TypeScript, it should be .ts. But the thing is that you can use it in JavaScript. So
Yeah.
use the lowest common denominator, right, for the suffix.
Yeah, and back in the day, everyone had it in the name, .js, and nowadays it's kind of like, isn't that kind of uncool already?
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, so Mastro, it's kind of the simplest web framework and site generator I could come up with. That was really the goal, to make it as simple as possible. And that's how it started. I was just like, couldn't this be simpler? And then I tried doing it, and that's how it turned out. And I'm quite happy with it. So I decided to share it with the world.
It's really awesome because I went through and read all the code in an afternoon, and I was like, okay, I get it. This is great. It's really awesome.
Awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, that's exactly the goal, that you should not be afraid to read the source code, because it's like around 700 lines of TypeScript. I think that's currently excluding comments and definitely excluding tests. But yeah, you should be able to just read it and understand immediately what it does, and maybe even fork it. Like, It's not supposed to be this big dependency that comes with everything and the kitchen sink, but really the stuff that you need for every web project kind of day one, which is like a router, so to map URLs to some kind of handler. Because if you just drop like a request handler on Cloudflare or DinoServe or whatever have you, yeah, you immediately want to add a router. Unless you have like only a single page, then you might be fine with just your index.html file actually, and then you don't need master. But yeah, that's kind of the next thing. And then a few helper functions to compose HTML. That's usually helpful. Like to get the escaping right, that's kind of annoying otherwise. And maybe some conventions for components. I mean, back in the day, people had various templating languages, and that works as well. But nowadays in JavaScript, you have built-in string literals, and you can tag them. So they are tagged string literals. And so the common name for the tag is HTML. So you do HTML backtick. There goes your string. There you can put in the variables and other stuff like call the components, which is just a plain normal function call. So it ends up feeling very similar to JSX, but technically it's done quite different.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's just HTML.
Yeah.
Which I really like because there's a couple like, I don't know, sharp edges in JSX that you just have to learn. Like the casing is important and no dashes. But it really reminds me of like web component, like forward approaches like lit and other like web component style libraries, or even just vanilla web components. Were you inspired by that at all? But by that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm lit HTML, I think, takes this exact same approach. At first, I was not quite convinced, probably just because I've spent too many years writing JSX myself. But then I think there you kind of have basically 3 or 4 ways to do HTML templating, like either with a non-embedded DSL, like Mustache or whatever you had back in the day.
Yep.
Or if you do if you use JavaScript to its fullest, which I think is quite cool that JSX popularized, you can build some kind of tree, either with JSX and a compiler, and it transforms the things, and it adds a lot of complexity that once you're used to it is kind of fine, but then maybe you want to send an email, right? And you need the thing as an HTML, like as a string. And then, why do I have to bundle it again? So that's kind of, I just want to send an email, like an HTML email. So that's one thing I ran into. And I mean, the tree, it has some kind of nice benefits. And then, of course, you can just get away with the syntactic sugar and build the tree yourself as just function calls, like each.p is a function and you call it and you give it the child things, which like a lot of other programming languages do that when you want to construct an HTML tree. And it's kind of cool, but it looks very different. It doesn't look like HTML. And so when you switch back to the browser developer tools, it looks very different and you cannot copy paste back and forth. But I mean, there's no right and wrong way, right? But in the end, what I settled, I felt the best trade-off for this project in terms of simplicity and still having a great developer experience was not having as a tree. It's just strings, right? But it's HTML. So, for example, you don't have to close all the tags, like the self-closing tags. You're not actually really supposed to close them because the browser will then put them in the tag soup parser anyway. So there's a can of worms there as well in JSX.
Yeah, if people remember the XHTML standard, that's when you had to close all the tags because it needed to fit the XML standards. But just regular like HTML5, you don't have to do self-closing tags, or you don't have to close all tags. but with JSX, it's basically XHTML. That's sort of what it teaches you to write.
Yeah, for like code golf, they take advantage of that a lot of the times, where you can get away with murder by not closing certain tags, and save yourself characters by not typing certain things.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty fun to watch.
Well, one thing I want to go back to is, as a listener, I might be familiar with other static site generators. So the one that comes to mind is the one that I'm familiar with and have used before is like 11T. I've also heard of Hugo. And, back in the day, we used to use Gatsby. And now, that's kind of fallen out of favor. And that's kind of gone the way of the dodo. But there are other static site generators. So I'm just curious, how does Mastro, I guess, and Astro too, of course, how does Mastro compare to all of these? Like, what should I be thinking of as a listener? Why would I want to choose Mastro over some of these other ones?
Sure. And just to get something out first, it's not only doing static site generation, it's also, Mastro is also running, you can also run it as a on-demand server, like to
Cool.
on-demand server site render stuff, just like Astro does as well, and Next.js, for example, does as well. So you have both modes and they both work kind of exactly the same.
Okay, so that's one of the primary differences between, let's say, Mastro and 11T. 11T you run once as like a CLI command, it builds your static site. But with Mastro, you can do that, but you can also just run Mastro as the server. So it's a little bit more similar to like Next.js, where it has like static site generated mode and then SSR mode. But is this SSR because it's not React? It's more like just like an Express server or something like that. How does the server mode kind of work?
Yeah, that's already getting into some of the design decisions.
Yeah. We can just go into what makes Mastro a bit different than some of these other frameworks.
Sure. I think it's really interesting because, like, if you think about it, the dev server, like even a static site generator like 11T or Hugo, that doesn't run a server in production. That you still have a dev server when you develop it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Mastro actually used the exact same server for development and production to keep things simple and to not have a discrepancy. And that's one thing I was curious about, whether that was possible when I started working. And I was like, that would be kind of cool to have that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only difference is kind of you pass the watch flag to Dino or Node.js, which has it now as well, built in natively. In dev mode, you tend to do that, and in production you probably wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But apart from that, you can still use end variables to distinguish the behavior, but just nothing built basically into Mastro that does that. And so, what's even then the difference? Like, so on the server rendering mode, you think first of the request comes in, and then you compute only for that single page, the HTML, and send it back. And in static site generation mode, it's the exact reverse. You generate all the pages, spit them out as HTML, and then usually for production, you dump them on some CDN where they are served really close to your users and really fast. For most websites, I think static site generation is probably, like, if you can get away with it, it's the best thing you can do. It's simple, it's secure, it's cheap. You can even just push to GitHub pages and have it for free. So I'm a huge fan. But sometimes you just, for some projects, or even you have that single form that you want to submit, and then have the server do something. I mean, if it's just sending an email, you maybe call a third-party service, but maybe you want to do something more fancy and have a good result page, and you can go to the full way, all the way, and add a database to Mastro. I mean, that's not built in, but you totally can do that. And I've been meaning to write a bit more documentation on that. And then you kind of have like a Ruby on Rails like setup, right? Or PHP. So I think it's really cool to have the full range of possibilities. And when you start a project, you don't always know where you'll end up with.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, or very often, you kind of have some static assets like CSS files and maybe some HTML pages that are static, that are always the same, or maybe like the high traffic landing page. And then you have some parts that you need to dynamically render on the server. So very often you have both. And most frameworks are kind of bad at doing both, I would say.
Yeah, let's
Sure,
get
yeah.
let's get into that, because I think one of my first questions is I can definitely see that hybrid mode being super useful if I want to have a bunch of static pages like blog posts, but then I have a page that dynamically goes and fetches, I don't know, my Blue Sky feed, right? So rather than using an embed widget, which I would have to do with just a regular static site, where I have to embed the Blue Sky snippets or whatever onto my page, with a server rendered page, I can go and fetch it from the API or do whatever I need to and make it natively styled, and it's super nice. So let's say that we have that
without any client-side Java.
Exactly, yeah. So let's say that we have that kind of scenario. How does Mastro make that easy for me as a developer?
And so, yeah, how I approach the design is that for every page, you just have a request handler. You might know from actually kind of almost every modern framework uses this nowadays with the standard request response objects that are built into browsers that were introduced for the Fetch API. This handler style, I don't think it has a real name yet, still not. Some call it Fetch API, some call it Request Response API, but it's not like the Express request responses, which are kind of custom, right? But for example, Cloudflare uses it as well, and both Dino and Bun have it built in natively. You can pass such a function to the Dino.serve or Bun.serve function, and it will spin up a server and run it for you. And so it's a really nice API. Still Node.js is dragging a little bit behind. So for that, I had to include a wrapper that translates between the native Node.js API. And that's not built into Mastro Core because that wouldn't fit into the 700 lines. But it's just like in the template when you start a new Node.js Mastro project. And my hope is one day Node.js will have it built in as well, and then we can remove that. And so, yeah, it's really cool that you can then, for example, also write tests. You just create a request object like new request. Then the test itself runs the function, and it can be pure, right? Like as in a pure function, as in functional programming, that you don't need to spin up an actual server and make an actual network request to hit the network stack and whatnot. So that felt like a really powerful API, and it's really at the core of Mastro. All the router does is kind of route the URL to the right one of those various handlers, and then transforms it into one handler that you pass to Dino.serve or Cloudflare or whatever you happen to be running on. And then how do you do the static site generation, right? So this works for local development. This works if you have a server running in production. But for static site generation, well, it's exactly the same like tests. The framework just creates a request object for every URL that you want to generate, sends it to your handlers, reads what comes back as the response object, and pipes that into a file with the right name, hopefully, if everything went well.
Very nice. It seems really nice and streamlined, like very smooth.
Yeah. I was looking at your to-do list server example that kind of gives you both the static and the client, with the naming convention of which I really like with the .client and the .server.ts. Pretty hard to mess where that's running, which I really do enjoy.
You mean you're not using the use server and use client directives?
Yeah, that's a little, don't get me started there. That's a little magical for my taste. But I love the fact that the file conveys the meaning and where it's running, which is super nice. And honestly, I'm going to steal your to-do list thing because I need a new to-do list thing because I switch to-do lists mechanisms every couple months. So I think I'm just going to take this example and run with it.
It's a classic switch my to-do list tool so that I can get more to-dos done and then never get my to-dos done.
Yeah, that's right. That's my favorite to do is to do more to-dos.
Yep.
Awesome. Let me know when you have it running in production.
Sounds good. I will.
And definitely. So the client server thing, it's surprising how complicated this has gotten in the recent years, right? So to the point of where lots of people are just using React and Next.js, but they don't know the difference between static cell generation and on-demand server rendering, which is like one dimension on one axis. And then you kind of have the other axis, which is like what runs on the client and what runs on the server. And then when you say server, like you mean either it was statically generated or it's an on-demand server, but just like not on the client. That's what I mean with server here.
Yeah,
and it gets really confusing quickly.
Yeah.
And so kind of untangling that, even like when writing the documentation for Mastro, that was kind of half of the work to use consistent naming. But like once you know how it works, it's really not that complicated. It's just like the naming is complicated. And so that's gotten, in my opinion, quite messed up. And I mean, there are advantages to how Next.js or even how Astro does it, like that you have the bundler that takes in everything, basically. You have everything in one code base and you can import vice versa, and then the bundler will kind of try to tree shake the thing, and hopefully only what you meant to go on the client will be still hanging on the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Which might or might not be the case, and you might not, or you might know about it, depending on how good you are at inspecting the output and or using browser developer tools, or suddenly it's like 5 megabytes my client bundle. I don't know why. And it's been like that for a few months already. I didn't notice that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's because I'm accidentally shipping the Markdown library to the client. Because imports can have side effects in JavaScript. So that's why it didn't reshake that import, which I thought it would reshake it, right? So,
Yep.
Let me know. I've been there. It's not like...
Lodash has gotten me a few times.
Yeah,
and Moment.
We were just talking about this because I was trying to optimize my client bundle, and I brought in a vendor dependency. And now this vendor basically has an embedded app that you can run, and it's a React SDK. So I take in this dependency, and I only use it on one page, and yet it gets put into my entire client bundle that people have to download on every single page. And I didn't catch it right away, right? Because it's not like an obvious thing. It's not like I'm inspecting the bundle size every single time, although maybe now I need to add like a PR, thing, a reporter that tells me. But it's so easy to get caught up with those like client bundle issues.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are reasons. There are advantages, right? It's not like they're doing that for no reason at all. Like if you're doing a single page app that has a lot of client-side functionality and that does share a lot of logic with the server, maybe that you don't really have much choice. Or let's say that the advantages definitely outweigh the disadvantages. But so that's kind of the third dichotomy, right? Single-page app versus multi-page app. A lot of, I would say... A lot of developers that just started recently appear to be like, what do you mean single-page application? Is there any other way to do that? That's the way Next.js does it. I think there are still a few things you can do with single-page applications that you cannot do with multi-page applications, like playing audio uninterrupted while switching to a page. Or keeping the scroll position of all the tiny diffs you have lying around, or maybe even the cursor position in some text input. That's kind of maybe 2 or 3 more, but that's kind of it. So I do think the pattern is heavily overused single page applications, and a lot of websites that are single page applications should be multi-page applications.
Mm-hmm.
Performance reasons, complexity reasons in the dev stack, like what we just talked about. And also because browsers have just caught up a lot. Like, it used to be that you said, oh, I see a little bit of white before the next page loads.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case anymore. Like, browsers have a paint holding, have had for years. And in addition to that, you have now view transitions. You add like 3
Mm-hmm.
lines of CSS if you count the braces. And you have a nice transition with a multi-page app.
Yeah, I need to use more view transitions because
I
like
do
I'm still
too.
doing old school like skeleton
Mm.
rendering to avoid the flash of unstyled content. But I think I need to be like doing more view transition stuff because I think that would just look prettier.
Yeah, and it's like you can just add it to any multi-page app. And I mean, you can, of course, be all fancy about it, but like with things flying in and zooming and having Star Wars style.
Yeah.
But you can also just add the default auto or whatever it's called, and then it will feel like a single page application, but load much faster on the initial page load because you don't need to load all the JavaScript for potentially all the different kinds of pages you might ever have. And so that means you don't need to have a client bundle with all that JavaScript. So that means you can keep the server JavaScript that renders HTML on the server and keep it there, and the client JavaScript, if you still need it, which you might need to do some counter or some to-do list or some interactive widget in the top right, like show the login state of your user, or there are lots of reasons, but so you can keep that separate. So in Mastro, you can still share JavaScript and execute it in both by just importing it on the server. I mean, the file is there anyway. But importantly, to send it to the browser, to have client side, you need to put it into the routes folder together with all the other routes and static files. And so it's very clear what actually ends up being used in the browser.
Yeah, that was my next question, because I'm thinking about that classic sort of hello world example with Next.js where you've got the server side rendering the initial state of a counter when a button, and then on the client side it resumes because React does hydration, and you can click the button and it increments the counter. And I'm wondering, how does that work in Mastro?
So there are various ways to do it. Like, Mastro is very unopinionated.
Cool.
There's no built-in functionality, basically. You just write your server handler and send the HTML, and the stuff you need on the client you drop into that folder as well. But I couldn't kind of help myself. I had to write a companion library for client-side JavaScript.
Nice.
That's called Reactive Mastro.
Cool. Yeah. Tell
Nice.
us about that a little bit more.
And it's actually on the same website, Mastro.js.github.io. You just scroll all the way down and there's a link there. And obviously it works well together, but technically they're two separate things. And so it's kind of similar to Alpine.js. Maybe that's the closest analog, or well, not really HTMX, but it has a similar vibe, maybe. Yeah, but not really. It's more like Alpine. I mean, it builds on web components. I don't know whether that's still considered a dirty word in some circles.
I'm into it. I think after the dust settles and XYZ framework has come and gone, because it's part of the standard, they'll still work and they'll still be around.
Definitely. Actually, web components, it's just an umbrella term for a few different technologies, right? As you know, the core thing is kind of the custom element that you can have a HTML tag and you put a dash in it and you're allowed to have your own elements kind of. And then another part is the shadow DOM, which Reactive Mastro does not use. I mean, I think you can actually, but the default way is to not, because I felt like usually you don't need that encapsulation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so how you do the custom elements, the JavaScript part is you define a class that inherits from, I believe, HTML element. It's called the class that's built into the browser, and that's how you define a custom element. So technically, Reactive Mastro is just a class that inherits from the browser one, and you inherit from that one. So you have all the power that gives you. What it does add, Reactive Mastro, is that it comes with a signals library.
Cool.
Because pretty much every client-side framework except React has figured out that signals are really neat, right?
Yeah, just for the audience, signals are a way to manage client-side state. So if you're a React developer, that's like use state. But in most other libraries, they are signals, but they operate very similarly. But it's a way to store and listen to state and react to it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's the opposite side of, instead of push, it's pull. So you can control when you re-render, and a signal will just keep track of whether or not it's been updated. So you can more efficiently decide whether or not you need to re-render.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the job Reactive Mastro does, that you can bind these signals to DOM elements with data attributes, and also the click handlers. Like, that's the two things you need, right? You need to where the output is put needs to be written, like where does it go, the counter, like after the signal changed. It needs to be written in the DOM somewhere, and that's what the client-side framework usually handles for you, because it's annoying to do it yourself. And the second thing that's annoying to do yourself is to attach the click and other event listeners to the right DOM button or what have you. So that's, Alpine also does it with data attributes, right? So that's why it kind of feels similar, but yeah, Alpine does not have signals. So
that's cool. So as like a comparison, it's not doing like an Angular style like custom syntax with like, different attributes or things like that. It's just using pure kind of HTML data attributes.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
So you can use it with any HTML kind of. It doesn't have
Nice.
to be Mastro HTML. So you can use Reactive Mastro with any HTML.
Very nice. I think for people, the way that, just sort of stepping back a minute, with the way that you're describing Mastro and even Reactive Mastro, sort of for people whose sensibilities are like, I love the web and I like web standards, this feels really good.
It's very webby. I love it.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm very much of the opinion you only should add a bundler or build step on any of that kind of machinery once it actually pulls its weight. Kind of like single page applications, like for there you need it, because otherwise it gets out of hand if you build a big single page application. But what I really wanted to do is to take a step back and look at what has the browser shipped in the last 10 years since we kind of last looked at this. And it turns out multi-page applications have gotten a significant upgrade, and so have other web technologies like custom elements and a lot of other stuff. And actually the same for other JavaScript runtimes, not just the browser, but also Node.js and Dino and Bun. They've improved significantly. Like, so much is built in now that are still built into bundlers and frameworks, because once they were designed and written and started to get traction like 5 or 10 years ago, that it wasn't built in yet. And now they're kind of stuck in their own implementation. And so, I wanted really from first principles design this and take as much advantage of everything that's built into these runtimes and the browser as possible, without, and then just adding like the 2 or 3 tiny things that are unfortunately still not built in.
Yeah, building for multiple runtimes can be really challenging. Like, how hard was it to make? Because as far as I can tell, reading the code, it's looks exactly the same for most runtimes. As far as I could tell, how hard was it to make it run on all of the runtimes that you do support?
So I started with Dino, which, I mean, I think all things considered was still a good decision. Kind of allowed me to live a little bit in the future and start using these APIs and kind of hoping other runtimes would catch up. And they mostly did, actually. Like, for example, I mean, since we are here on the TypeScript FM podcast, you just give it a TypeScript file and it runs it, right?
Yeah. I love that.
It is awesome. And now even Node.js does it, which is awesome. And I think without that, I would not have started the project because like you, I'm a fan of TypeScript. I mean, I think for small projects, JavaScript is fine. But as soon as you add a few developers, we've talked about this a lot. So I don't need...
Yeah, people who are listening are already bought in. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly so. But I don't love the build step.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you should talk about that a little bit more because with Mastro, there's no build step, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you do static site generation, you kind of do a build step.
Right. Yes. Yep.
So, yeah.
But there's no like TypeScript transformation sort of build step.
Not for the server code.
Not for the server code.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that makes sense.
I have a confession to make that actually, so that's the single bit that's a little bit magic. For the client-side bundle, there is a TypeScript conversion. That's really the only thing that there is magic in Mastro.
If we get that types as comments thing, you can just take that code out.
Exactly. I'm really waiting just for that, and then I'll take it down. But it's not using a huge bundler or TSC or anything. It's using TS blank space.
Okay. Yeah.
Which just takes out the types and puts in white space or new lines where the types were. So that means that the line numbers are still correct when you get error messages and stack traces. And the file names obviously are correct because by default it does not bundle anything. So I feel like it's really a lightweight transformation. But so yeah, if you name your file .client.ts and put it into the routes folder, then Mastro will, when you're running a server, just on the fly strip it because it's really efficient TS blank space. It just looks at that file and no imports and just strips the types and sends it along. And that's all it does, right?
Nice.
And obviously, if you do the static site generation, you do it when you generate the client sides. But yeah, for server files, there really is no build step.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And so, to go back to your question, so I started with Dino, and then once I kind of had it hammered out and working for Dino, I added Bun, which seemed like the next easiest thing. And had to add one polyfill for the pattern URL thing that's built into browsers and Dino and Node.js, but not Bun, interestingly. So basically a wrapper around regexes for routing, and it's built into browsers and standardized, and it's really cool.
Can recommend that because building your own is perilous.
That's right. Yep. So this is the URL pattern web standard API. And I was just checking, and it looks like it's baseline newly available as of September 2025. It's interesting that Bun doesn't quite have it yet, but they iterate so fast. Maybe they'll put it in by the time this comes out.
Yeah, it's kind of so new. I think there are not a lot of established frameworks using it, so there's no pressure on Bun to add it, I suppose. But yeah, since Mastro is fairly new, that's definitely what I wanted to use. It's made for that, and it works really well.
Hey, sorry, this is Future Comrade interrupting here, but in Bun 1.3.4, the URL pattern API is now available. So hopefully Mastro can implement that now. But just wanted to let you know that is available, even though at the time of recording we weren't sure if it was. All right, back to the show.
And then the third thing after Dino and Pan was, of course, adding Node.js, which, it was a bit of work. What was it like? I wrote a blog post about it. I should read up on that.
Yeah, we can include any of your engineering posts so that people can dive a little bit deeper into it too.
Yeah, just go to Mastro.js.github.io and click on the blog in the top right. And definitely the biggest gotcha was that I had to add this conversion between the standard request response handler API and the Node.js ones, which is a little bit more imperative, right? But I found this really nice NPM package actually by the Remix framework.
Yeah.
Oh.
Called node-fetch-server. And it does exactly that. That itself has zero dependencies, but it just adds this conversion.
Nice.
And so when you do the Mastro Node.js starter project, it adds this as a dependency to translate. And then you can still deploy it to Cloudflare, for example, and not include that, right? Because Cloudflare can natively handle that.
Right.
That's awesome.
That's super cool.
So I think just to dig in a little bit then, would it be accurate to say that when you're writing the client-side TypeScript, you should basically just treat it as if you're writing the Node.js native, like with type stripping, basically?
Yeah.
So you don't need TSC, that's one thing. But I imagine that if you want type checking, then you would have a separate script or something like that to do type checking. Is that right?
Exactly. So for Node.js, you just install TSC or your favorite TypeScript compiler. You've been talking about alternative implementations on this podcast. If you run Dino, it's built into Dino.
Built in.
Yeah. If you don't feel like checking the types, you can do that as well. It kind of defeats the purpose a little bit, but it's like very fast.
Nice. I mean, if you're just doing editor stuff, most of us, take the type checking inside the editor. But
exactly.
Yeah.
I have been bitten by that a couple times where I don't actually have a type check in my build, and I'm just relying on editor type checking, and then I accidentally break the build because I didn't actually type check my build.
That's why I think in CI it's a good idea to have that extra.
It's good in CI to be like, maybe type check this. I can wait a minute.
That's right. I do want to dive into just a couple more features, maybe some of the more advanced features. So first of all, I see that you have HTTP streaming. Do you want to explain how that works a little bit?
Sure. That was actually also, Astro also has it. So I'm also like a huge fan of 11t as a static site generator because it's been there forever and so stable. And also fan of Astro. Like if you have an existing React app, it's the great way to migrate off of it, kind of incrementally. And so a huge fan of Astro because it popularized MPA's multi-page app again in the JavaScript community. And they also have HTTP streaming, which is really good for performance. So then, actually, that's the initial name for Mastro came from minimal Astro and kind of grew beyond being just that. So I call it just Mastro now, but that was the inspiration.
Yeah, nice. That's a nice hat tip to Astro.
Yeah. And so HTTP streaming, for those, maybe if you did PHP back in the day, you remember that you sometimes did like Flush. That's what that did. Back in the day in HTTP 1.1, it was still called chunked encoding. But with HTTP 2 and 3, it's built in the lower levels of the protocol. And CDNs do it, of course, automatically. So if you have a static site generation thing and with a reasonable CDN, you don't need to do anything. But if you have a server that responds dynamically to a request from a browser, and you do maybe a database call or something that's potentially slow, what you ideally do is you send the top of the HTML already on the wire, while the database call is still processing, or maybe has not even been sent to the database yet. Right, so they can already read the user can already read the header and the menu of maybe that you might have at the top, and then only later down when you actually need the result from the database. Maybe it's a huge table with hundreds of rows. Ideally, you want to even stream the table, so that when the first row arrives from the database, you immediately forward it to the browser, while the other rows are still on the wire or even still in the disk in the database, right? And to support that, you just kind of have to make sure you don't block this whole thing on the whole wave, all the way from the database to your server, to the HTML templating thing that's running in the server, to the connection. If you have a CDN proxy, that should not break it. Like, just make sure you don't have an await on the whole thing anywhere, or the equivalent configuration in a CDN. So, and what Mastro does is just if you put the promise, for example, in the HTML template, you just put in the promise.
Nice.
And it will send the stuff that comes before the promise, even if the promise has not resolved yet. So you don't know yet what's going to be there. You can already send the stuff you have. And for the rows of the table, you would put in what is it called? An async iterable, which is this standard protocol that the JavaScript engines and browsers support, which still doesn't have map and filter functions, which is a bit annoying, but yeah, you either copy paste those 4 lines for the map function, or bring in some library if you have your favorite async iterable library. So what Mastro does is just, it allows you to put in a promise or an async iterable anywhere in the template, and it will stream that.
That's cool.
Yeah, the async iterable stuff really blows my mind. Like, I'm looking at the sample on the HTTP streaming header, and it's like so simple. It's so easy. I'm like, awesome.
Yep.
This is so cool.
Once
That's really cool. It feels, again, it just goes back to more it just feels simple and like feels like it's web standards, because like in Next.js, it'll do the same thing where but you have to use like the React API, right? You have to do like react.use. And use, you can give it a promise and it'll wait, to render everything. And you can do stuff where certain components are they load in lazily, so you stream like the rest of the page and then they load in lazily and stuff like that. But it's also more complex, and it's also, the mental model is also much more complex. Whereas this is like, I put a promise in the string template and it does what I expect. It waits until it's done and then it continues. Love it.
Exactly. And it's huge for performance, right?
Yeah.
Like,
so speaking of performance, we do have to end pretty soon, but speaking of performance, it looks like Mastro is pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, this was not the primary goal. Kind of the primary goal was simplicity, but definitely as a side effect, it ends up being pretty fast. Like, or at least by default. I mean, you can always add more JavaScript or put this 30 megabyte JPEG file in your folder, and it will be slow, obviously, but at least you will know why it's slow. There's no magic there. And
Very
so by
nice.
default, it's really fast. So, and the HTML generation, I optimized a bunch. So that's, I mean, at least in the benchmark that's checked into the repo, it's really fast as well. Kind of doing the string concatenation thing. And and if you don't have promises, you can actually, like implementation wise in Mastro, I can skip the text encoder UTF thing, and then it's like an order of magnitude faster.
Nice.
If you do have promises, you need to loop it through the text encoder thing, which has a bit of overhead. But it's still going to be faster than waiting for that database, right?
Yes.
You're talking milliseconds, right? And I mean, performance-wise, if you do one thing for your website, it's just get rid of the client-side JavaScript as much as possible, right? For 99% of websites.
Yep, exactly.
It really does not matter whether your server is a millisecond fast or not, usually, if you load in all that client-side JavaScript. So
Awesome.
I would start there if you're talking performance. But it's still really perform as far as I'm...
I think to end on this for listeners, first, where can they go to learn more about Mastro?
Just go to the website, Mastro.js.github.io.
Perfect. And they can install it with their favorite package manager of choice?
For Node.js, PNPM is kind of recommended, mostly because it's hosted on JSR.
Okay, nice.
Nice.
Which has been working great for me because then I don't need to run a bundler. I
Perfect.
just push the TypeScript to JSR, all right?
Yeah.
And for Dino and Bun, it just works directly. And there's also a template for Cloudflare workers. Yeah, if you just want to try it out, you can click the big Try Online with GitHub button, which will open VS Code inside the browser. And it runs actually as a VS Code extension as well.
Nice.
Sweet.
That's awesome.
So those
so
are the
cool.
4 modes.
Love it. And then do you have a community, or where can people sort of get involved? Because it's an open source project, obviously. So how can people get involved or learn more about Mastro if they're getting started?
Yeah, just open a GitHub issue or a GitHub discussion. That's currently the low tech. I'm thinking of maybe opening a Discord or something, but haven't really gotten around to it. But if you're into that, request it. And
nice.
Yeah, really looking forward to get the word out and have more people use it for fun projects and have feedback and build stuff on top of it, right? The core is really minimal, but the idea is to build stuff on top of it.
Love it. I think there's going to be plenty of people who are very enthusiastic about something that's minimal, is web standards, no extra TypeScript build step, just works out of the box and gets you fast, static, and server-generated HTML. I think there's plenty of people that are going to be totally into that.
Yes, and the thing I love about it most is it's super webby. It's got web components. The source code is extremely readable. So like, I was like, oh, I wonder how you're doing this. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And it's not difficult to read as a normal human, which is great because I'm a subnormal human. Now that my daughter is waking up super early, my intelligence is taking a hit.
Yep. Suboptimal is what we say, right?
Suboptimal human.
That's right. Perfect. Mauro, where can people go to follow you and hear what you're up to?
So there's a Mastro Blue Sky account. It's also linked. And on me personally, I'm on Blue Sky and Mastodon.
Perfect.
Yeah. So just hit me up there if you have any questions or suggestions.
Awesome. We'll include links to that in the show notes. So you can just check your podcast player, scroll down. You'll see all the links to everything that we just talked about. Mauro, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. This is so cool. I'm like revved up now to make my new app.
Your to-do list.
Yep, I need more to-do lists.
Fantastic. All right. We'll see you. I'll see you all for the next show. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at Kamronikus.com and Eric is at EricOnerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at TypeScript.fm.